सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Very occasionally, I start Cut The Clutter by asking you a riddle that guess what today's CTC is about, what today's Cut The Clutter is about. About today, I shall not dare to do so because I know all of you are much too smart not to have figured what today's Cut The Clutter will be about. Of course, all of you are right. This is about the Supreme Court Expert Committee report on the Adani-Hindenburg story. So the Supreme Court, we know, had set up this committee by its order of March 2, 2023. This was a committee headed by Justice Abhay Manohar Sapre, an eminent judge. Another eminent judge, Justice J.P. Devdhar, was a member. Then K.V. Kamath, among India's most eminent bankers. K.V. Kamath of the ICICI fame. He was a member. O.P. Bhatt, former chairman of State Bank of India. Nandan Nilekani, and well-known lawyer Shekhar Gupta. So all of them have given their report. This is the report. This is 173 pages. The good thing is it's a very clearly written report. Report has a lot of clarity. So when I saw this, I had planned to talk about something else today. In fact, I had planned to talk about American debt issue today. I might do it next week now. That Supreme Court released this report, and in a way, they upset my plans. And when I saw this report, for a moment, I said, can you do it on a Friday? Because Fridays I have to write national interest as well. But then once I started reading it, I found it to be an easy read. It's written with a lot of clarity. Now, what is this report about? This report is about certain questions that Supreme Court had set up in view of the Adani-Hindenburg controversy. Hindenburg, we know, is a famous short seller, came out with a report saying there was much wrong with Adani. Intention obviously was to bring down Adani's stock prices, and Hindenburg, in association with other short sellers, had begun short selling the stock on international markets. It's a perfectly legal and legitimate thing to do, even legal and legitimate to do if you know that there's going to be a report or you've done a report that is going to point out stuff about a company that make the stock to fall. Until this point, this is legal and legitimate. What would become questionable is if what you've said in that report is not correct, if that is not factual or that is fictional or mythical. Now, for this order, Supreme Court basically set out three questions. One, whether there's been a violation of Rule 19A of Securities Contract Regulation Rules 1957, which means has the company maintained minimum public holding required for a publicly listed company? The allegation in the Hindenburg report was that while the minimum requirement in a public listing might be 25% of shares being held by public, so a clear and transparent price discovery can take place. But in this case, many of those shares were held by Adani's own companies, shell companies, front companies, whatever you call them. That said, by the way, shell company, by its very definition, is not necessarily illegal. A shell company can be legal or illegal, just as a regular company can be legal or illegal. So a shell company doesn't have to be illegal. A regular company can indulge in illegal activity as much as a shell company can indulge in illegal activity. So just to say, oh, so-and-so owns shell companies doesn't mean so-and-so owns sham companies. Shell companies are not necessarily sham companies. Now, the first question, as I said, did they violate the conditions? Did they violate the law on having minimum public shareholdings? Number two, whether there's been a failure to disclose transactions with related parties. That is TRPs. TRPs not as for TV channels, but these TRPs are transactions with related parties and other relevant information which concern related parties to SEBI in accordance with law. And number three, whether there was any manipulation of stock prices and contravention of existing laws. Then Supreme Court while they asked SEBI to investigate, they also set up an expert committee. That is the committee whose report had been submitted to Supreme Court at the last hearing, but that report Supreme Court had asked for in sealed cover. But all credit to Supreme Court. Thank you very much, Lordships. Supreme Court has now released that report, because in the past we've seen these documents, reports in sealed covers going to Supreme Court and never seeing the light of day. In this case, this has been made public. So this was the expert committee, which had its own remit. Now the expert committee's remit was a bit wide. It was to provide an overall assessment of the situation, including relevant causal factors which have led to volatility in stock markets in recent past. So volatility, not just with the Adani stocks, but volatility in stock markets in recent past. Number two, measures to improve investor awareness. This is motherhood and apple pie. Number three, investigate whether there has been regulatory failure in dealing with the alleged contravention of laws pertaining to the securities of the Adani Group or other companies. So expert committee has answered these questions in this 173-page report. I can't summarize the report for you. That will take me 2 hours, right? It's 173 pages, but I'm giving you the key points. So first of all, the expert committee says volatility is not an inherent vice of the markets, which means markets have volatility. Just because markets have volatility, you can't say it is a bad thing with the markets. It's an essential bad thing, inherent bad thing. Iske bina ho nahi sakta. That's why markets are a bad thing, right? It's not like that. Markets are not a casino. Volatility is part and parcel of the markets. It's not necessarily is a vice. It's not necessarily a flaw. Second, they've said Indian markets have not been unduly volatile. And what have they based that on? They've based that on a scientific measure, which is the volatility index or VIX. Now, Indian VIX has not been that different from similar indices elsewhere. These are volatility indices. Then they've said that Hindenburg report is inferential. The Hindenburg report is inferential, but a lot of the shareholders, a lot of people in the markets looked at the report, and accordingly, looking at the report, they repriced and reassessed the Adani stocks. So Adani stocks fell, obviously, but Adani stocks after that repricing and reassessment have been stable. Then the expert committee marks out the 3 areas of its own specific investigation. The first were the regulations on minimum public shareholding violated. 2, was there sufficient or adequate or necessary disclosure of transactions with related parties in accordance with law? And 3rd, was there any stock market manipulation? So first of all, on minimum public shareholding. On minimum public shareholding, the committee has gone into great detail into the definition of what is a foreign portfolio investor, what is a foreign entity. So they say that SEBI has been investigating since 2020, not since 2016, as somebody said. 2020, SEBI has been investigating allegations or suspicions that 13 overseas entities, that is 13 overseas entities, including 12 FPIs, FPIs are foreign portfolio investors, that they are maybe not compliant with the law. So SEBI has been checking if they are compliant with the law. The basic test for that under Indian laws, the expert committee says, is that do you know who the ultimate beneficial owner of these investments is? And that is what every law, some law calls them beneficial owner, some law might say ultimate beneficial owner, because there might be one owner above another owner. For example, a fund makes an investment in one of these companies to be invested in Adani stock. That fund itself may have many investors. They can be high net worth individuals who take investments. So there'll be beneficial owners, above them other beneficial owners, and other beneficial owners, maybe 3 levels, 4 levels. So who's the ultimate beneficial owner? Then foreign portfolio investors, they have to make declaration of beneficial owners by identifying the natural person, which means the person who ultimately is the owner, who exercises the rights of those shareholders. Others can get financial benefits from those shares. So that is what needs to be done. Has that been done or not? That the committee has got into. And the committee has then noted that the SEBI has been investigating this since 2020. SEBI has come and made presentations to the committee, and committee says SEBI has had suspicions that they've been opaque structures, and they've always been suspicious about opaque structures that are not very transparent. And then the committee goes into what is an opaque structure and what is a transparent structure. So the committee says that SEBI has gone to ED, CBDT. They've also gone to their counterparts in 7 other jurisdictions. That means 7 other sovereign jurisdictions, other nations, to get data from there. And yet, and these are the expressions, all the expressions I use are expressions used by the committee. They say SEBI has drawn a blank in this. Then they say the fact, however, is, and that's where the contradiction comes from, that in 2018 itself, SEBI had withdrawn the regulation on what is an opaque structure. Now, if they had withdrawn the regulation on what's an opaque structure, why are they now getting into opaque structures? Because if the regulation is withdrawn, what are you investigating now? Then they say Rule 19A of Securities Contract Regulations Rules 1957. That puts minimum public shareholding at 25%. But since June 2010, many amendments have been made in this. Many amendments have been made. For some companies, you can have up to 10%. For public sector companies, there is a different dispensation. And there have been so many changes that it's now difficult to say that this is absolutely 25%. So in fact, the expression the committee uses more than once about SEBI's actions in this case is PIQUANT. P-I-Q. UANT. What does it mean? So I'm just looking at the dictionary meaning, and I will read out to you the dictionary meaning. The dictionary meaning of piquant is agreeably pungent or sharp in taste or flavor, pleasantly biting or tart. That means mazedar baat hai, right? It sounds like fun, sounds spicy, gossipy, maybe something like that. So they say that it's piquant, that SEBI is suspicious of many things, but they don't have evidence, and you can't just carry on on suspicions. These are my words, not the expert committee's words. Expert committee's words, I will tell you, because expert committee is saying that SEBI is going on suspicions without evidence. So without evidence, they say this could be, and now I'm quoting the expert committee, this exercise could be voluminous one, but potentially a journey without destination. Right? And they say that SEBI does not seem to have come up with any doubts on the beneficial owners. Then they say SEBI is not able to make out a case prima facie. And if SEBI is not able to make out a case prima facie, then where do you go after that? That's the reason they say this will be a journey without destination. They say the inversion of the process of proving a charge leaves the matter in the realm of suspicion. That means you can't just say, I have this suspicion, you prove that you are innocent. It doesn't work like that. That's why they call it the inversion of the process. Uta kar diya. Inversion of the process of proving a charge leaves the matter in the realm of suspicion. It is trite law. It is simple law. It is trite law that suspicion, however strong, cannot replace proof. These are very strong words from the expert committee, which includes 2 eminent judges. It is trite law that suspicion, however strong, cannot replace proof. Hindenburg strengthened suspicions, they say. But Hindenburg, obviously, the implication is not the committee's words. The implication is that Hindenburg strengthened suspicions, but could not bring proof. Then they go on to say, fundamental rules of evidence would require a conclusion of whether an allegation is proved, quote unquote, disproved, quote unquote, or not proved, quote unquote. This will be based on, again, I'm quoting from them, this will be based on factual matrix. If you look at the factual matrix, then the answer would be not proved. Now, if it is not proved, then suspicion itself cannot make any case for prosecution of an allegation or violation of any laws. Then they come to the next point. So these are the conclusions of the first question, which was that has there been a violation of minimum public holding regulations? Because that came from a deeper regulation that they were illegal shell companies sitting in tax havens where we didn't know, where India didn't know who the actual owners or investors were. So by implication or by insinuation, it was Adani's own money which had been transferred out and round trip. That is something that Rahul Gandhi has been saying. वो 20,000 crore रुपया किसी का है, that 20,000 crore he's been talking about. So that is the question addressed here. And the committee says that the SEBI so far has found no evidence, and you cannot go on and on investigating only on the basis of suspicion, because if you do so, then you will hit a dead end, or it will be a journey without end, which SEBI has done already. Then the next point, related party transactions. So once again, there are listing obligations. There is a regulation, set of regulations called LODRs, that is listing obligations and disclosure requirements. Has Adani Group been compliant with that or not? Now, at this point, committee says very interesting, and I wish I would see more such writing from documentation coming out of our adjudicating authorities, our courts, and our court-appointed committees. So this is para 83 on page 122 of the committee report. And I will read the whole para for you because it's so important. And remember, this is under the section that talks about related party transactions. That have they been related party transactions in the Adani Group? So they say, and now I'm quoting chapter and verse, para 83, page 122, the Constitution of India lays down a fundamental principle. All actions of human ingenuity are deemed to be permitted unless validly made law makes an intervention and restricts it. Next, going ahead, such interventions need to withstand the test of being intelligible, which means वो साफ होने चाहिए, समझ जाने चाहिए ऐसे interventions, being reasoned and not being arbitrary, right? In order to be constitutionally valid, that you can't do these things arbitrarily. You have to work within the framework of the Constitution. And then the same para goes on to say, the rule of law is not that unless explicitly permitted, human action is prohibited, but that unless explicitly prohibited, human action is permitted. So how do I explain this? It sounds complicated. It's not. It's very simple. Maybe the best way to explain this is to plonk myself into this. Now, the law says I cannot carry an unlicensed weapon. So if I am found carrying an AK-47, say, in public, that is illegal because there is a law that prohibits me from doing this. But if I am carrying this pen, right, you cannot say, hey, Shekhar Gupta, you're carrying this pen. Which law has authorized you to carry this pen? There is no law forbidding me from carrying this pen. That's why I can carry it. But I cannot carry an unlicensed weapon or an AK-47 because there is a law forbidding me from doing so. That is what the expert committee is saying in this very important explanation. Once again, the point being that just on suspicion, you can't do things. You have to prove something. And just because you think somebody did indulge in sharp practices which you don't like, as long as they were within the law, as long as there was no law barring them, you can't object to them. Now, there is a reason why the committee is going on and on about this. That's because in many cases, SEBI has started investigating the Adani Group from 2020 onwards. And they say in many of the areas where you're investigating them from 2020 onwards, you're looking at their actions under the laws that came into effect, your own laws and regulations, SEBI's laws and regulations that came into effect prospectively, that is going ahead from 2021, 22, even 23. So these laws which come into effect later, you cannot investigate a company for their actions in the previous years under these laws which came into effect much later. You cannot do it. And that is the question that they are raising. And they go on to say again in para 89, and I will read the whole para for you. However, the committee believes that once an approach is adopted, it must be implemented and adhered to in accordance with law. Predictability and certainty are vital elements of regulation since the majority of society would desire to be compliant. Most people want to be compliant with law. Most people are law-abiding citizens. So they say predictability and certainty are vital elements of regulation since a majority of society would desire to be compliant and therefore would wish to know what it ought to do to remain compliant. If past transactions were compliant, this is very important. If past transactions were compliant when they were transacted, and more so if changes have been made to the laws subsequently to outlaw a repetition of such past transactions, it would follow that there can neither be a repetition of the same structures in future, nor can they be an attack on the validity of past transactions, which means in the past these were legal. Now those are very important points that this committee is making. So they are not talking about the morality of what happened in the past. They are talking about the legality and also the propriety of how past actions are being judged. Once again, they object to SEBI's idea that, look, when we do a definition, when we find a definition of what's a related party, we also think that if you've had a long business association with somebody, that can be a related party. So the committee again objects to that. They say, this is para 90, as regards the principle of introducing long business association as rendering a business counterparty to be a related party, some caution would be in order. Certainty and consistency in servicing a business relationship is a virtue, and unless there is a strong benefit associated with burdening an arm's length business relationship as being a related party transaction for no reason other than having been a long-standing relationship, the measure may lead to an imbalance between the costs of the measure and the benefits of the measure, right? So once again, the committee has taken a very reasonable view on this. So then the committee comes to some big picture points. So para 94, they say, para 94A, the allegation of non-disclosure is not sustainable since by the application of legal definition of related party, none of the counterparties were related parties in the eyes of the law at the time of the transactions, which means today they may be related parties, but according to the laws that existed when these transactions took place, they were not related parties. These are key factors. So once again, they are not saying what happened was fully kosher according to the law today. What they are saying is they were kosher according to the law then. Now you might say the law then was imperfect, or there were loopholes and you have filled those loopholes, but that does not make past actions illegal. Then come to para 95. The committee notes once again the same point, a similar point that they had made earlier. The committee notes that predictability of the law is an important touchstone for economic legislation. That means there can't be arbitrariness. SEBI has been actively learning from developments in the market and has been consistently reacting to such learnings by regular amendments to the regulatory framework. So they say that, look, you keep changing these laws. Once again, the same question. You keep changing these laws as you are learning. But can you then judge people for what they did in the past when these laws did not exist? Then in the next para, they go on to say, para 96, a key question would then emerge that whether a commercial business can be accused of violating the law when the law at the relevant time did not exist, or did exist, but in a manner and form materially different from how it is formulated later. And then they come closer to conclusions. This is very important. So 103, point 103, they say this points to a simple thesis. The market has factored in the seriousness of the allegations on the commercial facets of the transactions in question. These are Hindenburg allegations. Regardless of whether the law is violated, the market has decided to reprice the Adani stocks, which means even if Adani did nothing illegal, the market has punished Adani by repricing their stocks. Repricing has all been downwards. There has been an infliction of price erosion and subsequent mitigation in the sense that the market stabilized. Every action that is legally compliant need not be an action that is considered desirable. A company can do something which is within the laws, but it may still not be desirable, and the markets will take a call on that. So they say if the markets feel the actions taken in the past were not entirely desirable, it would reprice the stocks. But that by no means can be extrapolated to inexorably conclude that a violation of law has been made out in the facts of the case. At which point I will point out to you a national interest article I'd done a few weeks back, and I'll share a link with you, both of the text and the video. You can watch that or read that, where I had said exactly this, that if Adani has done something wrong, the markets have already punished them. And Adani will deal with the markets and the markets will deal with them. So legality or illegality, that SEBI, other agencies, the courts, they will figure out in the course of time. On that, there is no need to jump to conclusions. And that's where this committee's report now comes handy. So in conclusion on this point, the committee says that it's evident that SEBI has been getting feedback about such transactions. They've been investigating these. And because they've been getting this feedback, they've been amending these regulations. And once again, to repeat for the maybe 15th time now, while they learn from these transactions that there are loopholes and amend their regulations, they cannot judge somebody who took their actions when these laws did not exist for violating the laws as these exist now. And they say invoking the spirit of law would not suffice to pursue a credible means of investigation into the matter, keeping a cloud over transactions. So either something is illegal under today's law or something is illegal under the law as it existed when it was done. But you can't say that it wasn't illegal when it was done because the law did not exist, but this was against the spirit of law. There is no such thing as spirit of law. You are either within the law of the land of the day or you are not within the law of the land of the day. Then the final question, which is price manipulation of Adani scripts. Once again, the report gives you a lot of data. It gives you tables. It tells you about movement in Adani stocks. True that many of the Adani stocks went up quite rapidly. They went up. They also went down quite rapidly once the report came out. So finally, on this case also, the committee's conclusions are brief in just 2 points. And I will read these points to you. One, as stated earlier, this is para 130. As stated earlier, the committee's remit is not to examine whether the price rise was justified, whereas its remit is to ascertain if there was a regulatory failure. It is apparent that SEBI was actively engaged with developments and price movements in the market. Next, para 131, the committee notes that all such investigations must be completed in a time-bound manner. At this stage, taking into account the explanations provided by SEBI, supported by empirical data, prima facie, it would not be possible for the committee to conclude that there has been a regulatory failure around the allegation of price manipulation. Now, if you look at all this, if you look at the totality of this report, this would say that on all 3 key questions, that is minimum public holdings, related party transactions and price manipulation, the committee has by and large said that they find nothing on evidence under today's law that they can find illegal. It is possible that some of the stuff that happened in the past does not look right. It may not look right in the spirit of law. But they also go on to say that what matters is the law as it existed then, not the spirit of law. And also you cannot assess actions by a company, individuals that they took in the past because they were compliant with the laws as in existence then. So you cannot now retrospectively judge them on today's laws because it's only by learning from experience that these laws have been amended and they've evolved over time.